So in terms of the bones, you've got the nasal, the frontal, the parietal, occipital, and for the lobes of the cerebrum, so this whole thing is the cerebrum, which is the telencephalon. You've got the frontal, this is the central sulcus, and then you've got the parietal and the occipital. And you can see that between the bone and the brain, you've got the dura mater, and so you can see the superior sagittal sinus, confluence of sinuses, the straight sinus coming back. I said this was all cerebrum, which is part of the prosencephalon, forebrain. This is the region where you get the diencephalon, which is the other part of the forebrain. So this kind of oval-shaped area is going to be the thalamus, which has this area, the circle in the middle of it, which is the interthalamic adhesion connecting the two thalamuses together. This triangular region down here is the hypothalamus. You can see the optic chiasma, the pituitary gland with its infundibulum, and the mammillary body are all coming off of the hypothalamus. The thalamus has the adhesion, and it also has the pineal gland coming off of the back of it. You can see the midbrain, which is the cerebral peduncle, and the tectum. And then you can see the hindbrain, which is the pons, medulla oblongata, and the cerebellum. And then you get the spinal cord. And if you look at the cerebellum, you can see it's got arbor vitae, which is the white matter, like a tree, and it's got these grey areas, which are called brown areas, which are called folia. If you go up here a little bit, you can see corpus callosum. That's the largest region of commissure fibers connecting between the two sides of the forebrain. You can see down here is fornix, which is part of the limbic system, along with mammillary body. And then between corpus callosum and fornix, you've got the septum pellucidum, which is a membrane between the lateral ventricle, which is deep inside the hemisphere there, and then you've got the third ventricle here, so in between those two you'd have the interventricular foramen. Between the third and the fourth, which is this triangular region here between the brainstem and the cerebellum, that's going to be the cerebral aqueduct. And then after the fourth ventricle, you're going to get the central canal running down inside the spinal cord. You've also got these other two commissure regions. So that's the anterior commissure, and that's the posterior commissure, and the interthalamic adhesion is also called the middle commissure. And
This right here.
so this here is what we call the choroid plexus, and that is located at the top of the ventricles, and it's the part which is creating the CSF, which fills the ventricles.
And just your sinuses.
And then you can see the frontal sinus here inside the frontal bone. You've got this bone is the ethmoid, so that would be where the cribriform plate would be. This superior nasal concha here would be covered in olfactory epithelium. This middle nasal concha is also part of the ethmoid. Inferior nasal concha is a separate bone. This would be the location of the choana between the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx. And this bone here is going to be the sphenoid, so that's the sphenoid sinus. And you've got this area here is the sella turcica with its hypophyseal fossa and its dorsum sellae. And then this is going to be the clivus, which is what the pons is up against, and that's part of the occipital bone, which you can see the opening through which the spinal cord passes is called the foramen magnum in that location.
What is this little guy?
And so in addition to these lobes, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, you can see they're separated by the central sulcus, but this lobe here, just above the corpus callosum, is called the cingulate gyrus, and that's all well and good. And if you have a brainstem somewhere, can you toss me that brainstem? So if you look at this brainstem here, you can see that this would be the insular lobe, So you can see cingulate gyrus here, and you can see that this inside there would be the insular lobe, which you can see nicely if you pull apart the lateral and the frontal lobes. So you also can't see lateral on this view, just like you can't see lateral sulcus in this view.
Just do sulcuses.
Well, central sulcus is the one which is kind of running across like this between the frontal and the parietal. Lateral sulcus is running back like this between the frontal and the temporal. Transverse fissure is going to be here between the cerebellum and the cerebrum with the tentorium cerebelli in it. So it's kind of a continuation of this laterally. And then the one running down here, separating the two halves, is going to be the longitudinal fissure, which contains falx cerebri.